Emma Williams hadn't eaten in 3 days when she raised her fist and pounded on the iron gate of Walker Ranch. Her shoes were gone, her feet were bleeding, her dress hung off her bones like a flag of surrender. But her eyes were anything but surrendered. She didn't beg, she demanded. And the coldest, richest, most broken man in all of West Texas heard that knock and felt something shift in his chest he hadn't felt since the day he buried his wife. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to this channel, follow Emma's journey all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The summer of 1874 had no mercy. It hadn't rained in 41 days across the Texas Panhandle. The creeks had pulled back into the earth. The grass had gone the color of old bone, and the road that cut through the red dust toward Walker Ranch was the kind of road that swallowed people. The kind of road that didn't care whether you arrived or not. Emma Williams arrived. She came down that road the way a woman comes when she has nothing left to lose. One foot in front of the other, jaw set, eyes fixed on the iron gate ahead. She hadn't eaten since a farmer's wife in Abilene had pressed half a corn cake into her hands 2 mornings back. Her shoes had given out near the county line. She'd wrapped her feet in strips torn from her petticoat, and even those were soaked through with blood by now. She was 31 years old. She'd been a school teacher. She'd been a wife. She'd been a mother for 14 months before fever took her baby, and a bad harvest took everything else. Now she was a woman in a ruined dress, walking toward a gate that had no reason to open for her. She stopped in front of it. A ranch hand was sitting on a fence post just inside the gate, whittling. He was young, maybe 19, with a sunburned neck and the kind of smirk boys wear when they've got nothing better to do than feel superior to someone. He looked her up and down. He took his time about it. "You lost, ma'am?" "No," Emma said. "I'm looking for work." He snorted, didn't even try to hide it. "Work." He said the word like she'd offered him something rotten. "That's what I said." "Lady, this is Walker Ranch. We don't hire—" He stopped himself, but the pause said everything he didn't finish. Emma looked at him without blinking. "Finish your sentence." He shifted on the fence post. "We don't hire women. Boss's orders." "Is your boss here?" "He don't take meetings with—" "Is your boss here?" Something in her voice cut through the summer heat like a blade. The boy blinked. He was no longer smirking. "He's in the main house," he said finally. "But I ain't gonna—" "Thank you." Emma put both hands on the iron gate and pushed. It wasn't locked. She walked through. Hey, you can't just—" The boy scrambled off the fence post. "Ma'am, I'm telling you, Mr. Walker doesn't—" "Then Mr. Walker can tell me himself." She walked across that yard with her bloody feet and a ruined dress and her spine so straight it could have been carved from oak. 2 more ranch hands came out of the barn. They stared. One of them said something to the other that she didn't catch, and she didn't care to. She went straight to the front door of the main house and knocked. Nothing. She knocked again. 3 hard raps. The door opened. Nicholas Walker was not what she'd expected. She'd heard the name before, twice in Abilene, once from a supply wagon driver who'd passed through 3 days back. "Richest spread in 3 counties, the driver had said. Owner's half a ghost since his wife died. Man barely comes out of that house." She'd pictured someone old, sagging, rotted through with grief and whiskey. Nick Walker was 36. He was tall, 6'2" at least, with dark hair that needed cutting and a jaw that looked like it had been clenched so long it had forgotten how to release. His shirt was clean. His eyes were not. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had taught himself not to feel things, and who was working very hard at it every single day. He looked at her the way you look at something that shouldn't be there. "Whatever you're selling," he said, "I don't want it." "I'm not selling anything." Emma met his gaze without flinching. "I'm looking for work. I heard you run a large operation here, and I thought you might need—" "I don't need anything." "You have 2 daughters." Something moved behind his eyes. Just a flicker. Then the wall went back up. "Who told you that?" "People talk in Abilene. Sir, I'm a trained school teacher. I can read, write, cipher, keep accounts, cook, mend, and manage a household." "I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for honest work at fair wages. I'll start today if you'll have me." Nick Walker studied her for a long moment. His gaze dropped to her feet, to the blood-soaked rags she had wrapped around them. And something crossed his face that wasn't quite pity, but wasn't quite nothing either. Then it was gone. "No," he said. He started to close the door. "Mr. Walker." He stopped. Emma's voice had changed. It wasn't harder. It was quieter. And somehow that was worse. "I have walked for 23 days, she said. "I have slept on the ground. I have gone without food for 3 days running. I am not asking you for sympathy, and I am not asking you to care about what I've been through. I'm asking you to look at me and see someone who has enough fight left in her to be useful to you. That's all." He turned back, looked at her for a long moment. "You got a name?" "Emma Williams. From Missouri." "You got family in Missouri?" "Not anymore." He studied her the way men study a horse they're not sure they trust. Not unkind exactly, but not kind either. "You'd be living on the property," he said. "That's not negotiable. There isn't anything within walking distance." Emma didn't let herself react. "I understand. My daughters are not easy." He said it like a warning, like he was trying to scare her off. "I've never met a child who was." "My older girl, Emily. She's 9. She doesn't want anyone here. She'll make that very clear. I've handled resistant students before. This isn't a classroom." "No," Emma said, "but the job is the same. You figure out what they need and you give it to them, whether they ask for it or not." Nick Walker said nothing for a moment. His jaw was still tight. His eyes were still unreadable. $30 a month, he said finally. "Room and board included. You'll eat with a family. You'll take meals in the kitchen otherwise. You'll answer to me and no one else on this property." "Agreed. You start with the girls. We'll see how long that lasts." He stepped back to let her through the door. The room she was given was small and plain. A narrow bed, a washstand, a window that looked out over the back fields. It was the cleanest room Emma had slept in since she'd left Missouri, and she stood in the middle of it for a full minute just breathing. Then she washed her feet, set her jaw against the sting of it, wrapped them in clean strips of cloth she found in the washstand drawer. Whether meant for her or left there by accident, she didn't ask. She was ready in 20 minutes. The housekeeper, a stout Mexican woman named Rosa, met her in the hallway with an expression that was more guarded than hostile. "You are the new governess?" Rosa asked. "That's what I understand." Rosa's eyes moved to Emma's dress, still worn, still bearing the dust of 3 weeks' travel, though Emma had done what she could with a damp cloth. "I can find you something to wear. From the storage trunk. Mr. Walker won't say anything, but he notices." Emma looked at her. "He notices things he doesn't comment on?" "He notices everything," Rosa said. "He just doesn't talk about most of it." She led Emma down the hallway to a set of doors at the back of the house. "The girls are in the schoolroom," Rosa said. She hesitated. "Miss Emma, the older one, Emily. She chased off the last 2 women Mr. Walker brought in. One of them left in the middle of the night." She paused. I am not telling you this to frighten you. I am telling you so you understand what you're walking into. What did Emily do to them? Rose's mouth tightened. Said things about their worth, about whether they belonged here. The kind of things a child says when they are angry and afraid and don't know any other language for it. Emma thought about that. Thank you, Rosa, she said, for telling me. She knocked on the schoolroom door. Silence. She opened it. Emily Walker sat at the table with a book open in front of her that she wasn't reading. She had her father's dark hair and her father's jaw. Already, at 9 years old, that same set to it that said the world was going to have to earn her trust. She looked up at Emma with eyes the color of good coffee, and her expression was neither surprised nor welcoming. It was calculating. In the corner, tucked into a chair with her knees pulled up and a rag doll pressed against her chest, was Sarah. 5 years old, wide brown eyes, a smear of something, jam maybe, on her cheek. She looked at Emma with the tentative openness of a creature that has been hurt before, but hasn't quite finished deciding whether to hope. Emma stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "Good afternoon," she said. "My name is Miss Emma. I'll be working with you on your studies." Emily looked at her without expression. "You won't last." "Emily," Emma said calmly, "that may be true, but it isn't a polite way to begin a conversation." "I don't care about polite." "You will when you're older, and it'll be easier to learn it now." Emma moved to the table, pulled out the chair across from Emily, and sat. "What are you reading?" Emily glanced down at the book like she'd forgotten it was there. "Nothing." "Doesn't look like nothing." A pause. Then, reluctantly, "Robinson Crusoe." "Have you gotten to the part where he finds the footprint?" Emily's expression flickered, just for a second, with something that was almost interest. "Not yet." "It'll surprise you," Emma said. "Not the way you think it will." Sarah's voice came small from the corner. "Do you know more stories?" Emma turned toward her. "I know quite a few. Our last teacher didn't know any stories. She only did sums." "I do sums too," Emma said, "but I think there's room for both." Sarah unfolded herself from the chair, one slow inch at a time, and padded toward the table, Ragdoll trailing behind her. She stopped 2 feet away and looked up at Emma with those wide, careful eyes. "Your feet are hurt," Sarah said. "They are," Emma said. "Did you walk a long way?" "I did." "Why?" "Because I needed to find a good place to be." Sarah considered this with the gravity of a very small judge. Then she climbed into the chair next to Emma and set her rag doll on the table between them. Emily watched all of this without speaking. Her jaw tightened the way her father's did. "She always does that," Emily said. The hostility in her voice had an edge of something else now, something closer to fear. "Does what?" "Trusts people she doesn't know." Emily looked at Emma with those flat, measuring eyes. "She trusted our last teacher. She cried for a week when she left." Emma met the girl's gaze steadily. "I'm sorry that happened." "Sorry doesn't fix it." "No," Emma said. "It doesn't." Something shifted in Emily's expression. She'd expected more. An argument, maybe. A promise Emma wasn't going to make. "You're not going to tell me you'll stay?" Emily said. "I'm going to tell you I intend to," Emma said. "I can't promise you more than that. Nobody can promise more than that. But I'm here today, and I intend to be here tomorrow. And I think that's worth something." Emily said nothing. She picked up Robinson Crusoe and went back to not reading it. Emma began the lesson. Nick Walker came to the doorway of the schoolroom at 5:30. He didn't knock. He stood in the frame with one shoulder against the door and watched. Emma was at the chalkboard she'd found propped against the wall. She'd set it up herself, dragged it out of the corner, and found a piece of chalk in the desk drawer. And she was writing out long division problems in her neat, precise hand, while Sarah watched with rapt attention, and Emily sat with her arms crossed, pretending not to listen. She knew he was there before she turned around. She felt the temperature in the room change, the way it does when a man like that enters a space. Not warmth, exactly. More like pressure. She finished the problem on the board and turned. "Mr. Walker." He straightened. His eyes moved from the chalkboard to his daughters, and then back to Emma. Something in them was not soft, but less hard than it had been this morning. "Supper's in an hour," he said. "Thank you." He looked at Emily. "You behave yourself?" Emily shrugged. "She's not as bad as the other ones." It was the closest thing to a compliment Nick Walker's older daughter was apparently capable of. He seemed to understand that, because something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, the ghost of one. "Supper in an hour," he said again, to no one in particular. He left. Sarah looked up at Emma. "He used to smile more," she said, with the matter-of-fact sadness that only very small children can manage. "Before Mama went away." Emma looked down at her. "I know, sweetheart. Do you think he'll smile again?" Emma looked at the empty doorway where Nick Walker had just been standing. "I think," she said carefully, "that some things take time. But that doesn't mean they don't happen." Sarah seemed to accept this. She turned back to the chalkboard with her rag doll tucked under her arm. Emily hadn't said anything, but she was no longer pretending not to listen. Supper was a quiet, careful thing. Nick Walker sat at the head of the table and ate with the systematic focus of a man who views meals as fuel rather than pleasure. Emily sat on his left and ate without speaking. Sarah sat on his right and chattered softly to her rag doll, which he had propped against the salt cellar. Emma sat across from the girls and ate what Rosa brought her and kept her eyes on her plate unless someone spoke to her. For the first 15 minutes, no one did. Then Sarah said, "Miss Emma knows lots of stories." Nick's eyes came up briefly, back down to his plate. "Is that so?" "She said Robinson Crusoe has a surprising part that doesn't surprise you the way you think." A pause. "You read Robinson Crusoe?" This last was addressed to Emily, who stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Some of it," Emily said. "What do you think of it?" Emily glanced at Emma, quickly, like she didn't want to be seen doing it, and then back at her father. "It's all right." Nick nodded and returned to his food. Emma took a breath. "Mr. Walker, I noticed there's a secondary ledger in the study that doesn't appear to be current. If it would be useful, I can reconcile it against the main accounts. I worked as a bookkeeper for a period in Missouri." His fork paused for just a moment. "You, a bookkeeper and a school teacher," he said. "I'm good at whatever I need to be good at." He looked at her then. Really looked at her. Not the quick assessment of this morning, but something slower. Something that was trying to figure out what she was. "I'll think about it," he said. Rosa came in to clear the plates. Sarah had fallen asleep in her chair, rag doll still clutched tight, cheek resting on her small fist. Nick looked at her, and for just a second, the wall came down. Just a crack. His expression became something terrible in its gentleness. Then he stood, picked his youngest daughter up with the practiced ease of a man who'd done it 1,000 times, and carried her out of the room without a word. Emily watched him go. Then she looked at Emma. "He does that every night," Emily said. Her voice was flat, defensive, like she was daring Emma to make something of it. "He loves her very much," Emma said. "He loves both of us." Emily said it quickly, like she needed Emma to know it, needed to make sure it was understood. He doesn't know how to. She stopped. He's doing the best he can, Emma said. Emily looked at her plate. That's what everyone says. Is it wrong? A long pause. Emily pushed a crumb around with her finger. I just want him to be okay, she said finally, very quietly, like she was admitting something she'd never said out loud before. He looks so tired all the time, like he's carrying something really heavy, and nobody's helping him with it. Emma sat with that for a moment. That's a very perceptive thing to notice, she said. Don't talk to me like I'm little. I'm not. I mean it. You're paying attention to your father in a way a lot of people wouldn't. Emily looked up. Something wavered in her expression. That 9-year-old war between wanting to trust and being terrified to. Are you going to leave? She said. I told you, Emma said. I intend to stay. That's not the same as saying no. No, Emma agreed. It isn't. Emily looked at her for a long moment. Then she pushed back her chair, picked up her napkin, folded it with precise, careful hands, and set it on the table. Good night, Miss Emma, she said. She walked out. Emma sat alone at the long supper table in the quiet of the summer evening, listening to the ranch settle around her. The creak of timber, the distant sound of cattle, the low murmur of men finishing their work outside. She was 31 years old. She had nothing left from her old life but the education in her head and the stubbornness in her spine. And for the first time in a very long time, she was somewhere that might, with enough patience, become something like home. She didn't let herself believe it yet. Belief was a luxury. But she let herself sit with it, just for a moment. Then she folded her own napkin, set it on the table, and went to find a bucket of water and a rag. There was work to do. There was always work to do. And Emma Williams had never once in her life walked away from it. The bucket was heavier than it looked. Emma carried it down the back hallway anyway, her wrapped feet making no sound on the floorboards, her arms steady, even though her shoulders had been aching since somewhere around the 3rd day out of Abilene. She found a mop propped in the corner near the kitchen, and she took it without asking anyone's permission, because nobody was there to ask, and because the floor needed doing, and the floor wasn't going to do itself. Rosa found her 20 minutes later, on her hands and knees in the kitchen, scrubbing a stubborn stain near the wood stove. Miss Emma! Rosa's voice had alarm in it. That is not your job. I know. Emma sat back on her heels and wrung out the rag. But it needed doing, and I was up. Rosa was quiet for a moment. Then she came and crouched beside her and took the rag from her hands. I will finish. You should rest. Your feet, my feet are fine. They are not fine. I saw them. Emma looked at her. Rosa's face was firm, but there was something underneath the firmness. A kind of careful, watchful concern that Rosa hadn't bothered to hide. Emma recognized it. It was the look of a woman who had seen enough hired help come and go that she no longer wasted hope on them, but hadn't quite killed it either. Rosa, Emma said, how long have you been with the family? 11 years. You were here when Mrs. Walker was alive. Rosa's hand stilled on the rag. Yes. What was she like? Rosa stood up slowly and wrung the rag over the bucket. The sound of the water dripping was the only sound in the kitchen for a full 5 seconds. She was beautiful, Rosa said finally, and she knew it. And she was not... She stopped, started again. She was not a bad woman, but she was not made for this life, for the ranch, for the quiet. She paused. She left 18 months ago. Not died. Left. Emma went still. She's alive? As far as anyone knows. Rosa's voice was careful, empty of judgment, but only barely. She went back to her family in San Antonio, her parents, the Hargroves. She said the name the way you'd say the name of a weather system that had already destroyed your crops. They are people with money and lawyers and opinions about everything, including those two girls. Emma thought of Emily at the supper table. I just want him to be okay. He looks so tired all the time. She thought of Sarah, asleep in her chair with her rag doll. She thought of Nick Walker, carrying his youngest daughter out of the room with that terrible gentleness on his face. The Hargroves want the girls, Emma said. It wasn't a question. Rosa looked at her with eyes that had seen enough to know when someone was quick. They have wanted them since their daughter left. They say Mr. Walker is not a fit father for young girls without a woman in the house. They say the ranch is no place for children. She paused. They have sent lawyers twice. Mr. Walker sent them away both times. But each time it cost him. Cost him money? Money. And something else. Rosa touched her own chest, just below the collar. Each time they come, he gets quieter. He pulls in like a man who's waiting to be hit again, and has decided not to show that he's afraid. Emma stood up. Her feet hurt. She didn't let it show. Thank you, she said, for telling me. Rosa picked up the bucket. I told you because you should know what you walked into, she said. Not because I think you can fix it. Some things don't get fixed, Miss Emma. They just get survived. She carried the bucket out. Emma stood in the empty kitchen and felt the weight of that settle around her like the heat. She couldn't sleep. She lay in the narrow bed and listened to the ranch breathe. The timber, the wind off the flats, something moving in the yard outside, probably a dog. And she stared at the ceiling and thought about the Hargroves and their lawyers. And she thought about Emily's jaw set the same way her father's was. And she thought about Sarah's rag doll, propped against the salt cellar like a small guest at supper. At some point past midnight, she gave up on sleep entirely and got up. She went to the study. She hadn't been given permission to be there, but she hadn't been told she couldn't, and the ledger she'd mentioned at supper had been nagging at her since she'd passed the open door that afternoon and caught a glimpse of it, sitting on the desk like a problem that had been stared at and then given up on. The lamp on the desk still had oil in it. She lit it and sat down and opened the ledger. She'd been a bookkeeper for 14 months in Jefferson City, working for a dry goods merchant who'd had 3 sets of books and the organizational skills of a distracted crow. After that, anything felt manageable. This felt less manageable. The numbers weren't wrong exactly. They were incomplete. There were gaps, weeks where the column had simply been left blank, dates where figures should have appeared and didn't, as though whoever had been keeping the accounts had simply put the pen down one day and not picked it up again. She flipped back through the pages and found the date where the entries started getting sparse. 18 months ago. She sat with that for a moment. Then she pulled a fresh sheet of paper from the desk drawer, uncapped the ink, and started working. She was 3 pages into her reconstruction when the study door opened. She didn't hear him coming. That was the unsettling thing. A man that size moved through his own house like he'd learned not to take up space. Nick Walker stood in the doorway in his shirt sleeves, lamp in hand, and looked at her. His expression was not angry. It was something more complicated than angry. You want to explain what you're doing in my study at 1 a.m, he said. Emma set down her pen. She didn't stand. She was tired enough that standing felt like a negotiation. I told you at supper I thought the ledger needed reconciling. I thought about it and said I'd let you know. It was bothering me. He looked at the papers spread across his desk. He looked at her careful notations in the margins, the columns she'd started drawing out. His jaw was tight, but something in his eyes was, different from this afternoon. Less like a wall, and more like a man who doesn't know what to do with something he didn't expect. "You found the gaps," he said. 18 months worth of them. She paused. "I'm not asking what happened, but I can fix it if you'll let me. I'll need access to the bank receipts and any supply invoices you have, whatever's in the files." Nick moved into the room. He set his lamp on the corner of the desk and stood looking down at her work. Up close, she could see the lines that had been cut into his face by the last year and a half. Not age, exactly. Something harder than age. "Helen kept the books," he said. His voice was flat and precise, like he was reporting something that had happened to someone else. "When she left, I tried to keep up with it. For a while. Then I stopped." "It's recoverable," Emma said. "It'll take a couple of weeks, but I can get it right." "Why?" He looked at her directly. "Why does it matter to you?" She met his gaze. "Because you need it done, and I can do it, and I was hired to be useful." He studied her for a long moment. "Most people," he said carefully, "who come here and see what this place is, what it's been, they don't go out of their way to take on more. I'm not most people." "No," he said very quietly. "I'm starting to see that." He picked up his lamp, stood there a moment longer, like he'd meant to say something else and changed his mind. "Get some sleep, Miss Emma," he said. "The books will still be here in the morning." He left. Emma looked at the empty doorway for a moment. Then she capped the ink, straightened the papers, and turned off the lamp. She slept. Morning came loud. She heard the crash from 2 rooms away. A sharp, violent sound, like something thrown against a wall. And she was out of bed and in the hallway before she'd fully woken up, her heart already in her throat. The schoolroom door was open. Emily was standing in the middle of the room with her arms crossed and her face white with something that wasn't quite anger. It was too controlled for anger, too deliberate. And on the floor near the chalkboard was the lamp that had been on the table, shattered, oil spreading across the floorboards. Sarah was in the corner, not crying. She'd gone very still, the way small animals go still, and she was watching her sister with those wide brown eyes. Emma stepped into the room. "Emily," she said, "I didn't want the lesson." Emily's voice was steady, colder than a 9-year-old voice had any business being. "I have things to do. You threw the lamp. It fell. It didn't fall." Emma kept her voice even. She crouched and began picking up the larger pieces of glass carefully, methodically, setting them on the table. "You threw it because you're testing me." Silence. "And that's all right," Emma continued. "Test me all you want. But you're going to clean up this oil with me, and then you're going to sit down, and we're going to do the lesson. And tomorrow, if you want to throw something else, I'll still be here." "You don't know that," Emily said. The cold control cracked just slightly. Just enough. "The Hargroves are coming," Sarah said from the corner. The room went completely still. Emma looked at Sarah, then at Emily, whose face had shifted, the deliberate coldness gone, replaced by something raw and cornered and frightened. "How do you know that?" Emma asked carefully. "I heard Papa talking to Rosa this morning," Sarah said. She didn't seem to understand the weight of what she'd said. She clutched her rag doll tighter. "He was using his quiet voice. He uses that when things are bad." Emma stood up. She looked at Emily. Emily's jaw was set. Her eyes were bright with something that wasn't tears. Not yet, but was about to be if someone pushed on the wrong place. "Is that why you threw the lamp?" Emma asked. She kept her voice very quiet. Not gentle exactly. Emily didn't respond to gentle. She'd already figured that out. But level. Real. Emily said nothing for a long moment. Then, very quietly, "They want to take us to San Antonio." "I know," Emma said. "They have lawyers." "I know." "Papa doesn't—" Emily stopped. Her voice had gotten thick. She clamped it down hard. "He pretends he's not scared. But he is." "He's doing everything he can," Emma said. "That's not enough!" The word cracked out of her like something that had been under pressure too long. "Last time they came, they brought papers, official papers, and Papa sat in that study for 2 days and didn't come out. And Rosa made his meals, and he didn't eat them. And I—" She stopped again. Her hands were fists at her sides. "I'm not going to San Antonio. I don't care what papers they bring." Emma crossed the room and stood in front of her. Emily looked up at her, and for just a moment the 9-year-old was entirely visible. Not the closed jaw and the calculating eyes. Just a child who was terrified of being taken away from the only home and the only parent she had left. "Listen to me," Emma said. "You are not going anywhere. Your father is not going to let that happen." "You don't know that." "You're right. I don't. But I know your father, and I've known him exactly 1 day. And even in 1 day, I can see that he would set himself on fire before he let anyone take you from this ranch." She paused. Let that sit. "And I know something else." Emily waited. "I've dealt with people who have lawyers and money and power before," Emma said. "And I've learned one thing about them. They expect you to be scared. They count on it. That's how they win." She looked at Emily steadily. "So don't be scared. Be ready." Something shifted in Emily Walker's face. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was the beginning of the consideration of trust, which is the thing that has to come first. She unclenched her fists. "You still have to clean up the lamp," Emma said. Emily looked at the floor. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. Nick was saddling his horse in the yard when Emma came out after the morning lesson, shielding her eyes against the white-hot punch of the midday sun. "Mr. Walker!" He looked up. He had a piece of paper in his hand, folded, sealed, the kind that came by post from somewhere with lawyers' offices in it. He looked at the paper, then at her. "The Hargroves are coming," he said. "Week from Saturday." "I know. Sarah overheard you this morning." His expression tightened. "I didn't want the girls to—" "They already know," Emma said. "Emily knows. She's been scared since she woke up." She paused. "What do the papers say?" Nick looked at her for a long moment. She could see him deciding whether to answer. Deciding, essentially, whether she'd earned the right to ask. "They're petitioning for temporary custody," he said finally, "on the grounds that a widower— they still call me a widower, like the woman is dead instead of in San Antonio spending her mother's money— is an unfit guardian for 2 young girls without a female presence in the household." He said it in a tone that was pure, controlled fury, which was somehow worse than shouting. "My lawyer says the petition has merit, in the eyes of the court." Emma thought about that. "They knew you didn't have a woman here." "They've had someone watching the property." His voice was flat. "Someone from town, I think. I don't know who." "And now I'm here," Emma said. He looked at her. "You've been here 1 day." "I've been here 1 day, and you have a governess on the payroll, and the girls are in lessons, and the accounts are getting reconciled." She held his gaze. "That changes what the petition looks like." Nick was quiet for a moment. The horse shifted, and he steadied it with one hand without looking at it, the automatic reflex of a man who'd spent his whole life around animals and terrain that needed managing. "You're suggesting," he said carefully, "that your being here is strategically useful." "I'm pointing out that it is," Emma said. "Whether I'm here for strategy or not is a different question. I'm here because I needed work, and you needed help. But the fact of it changes your position." "The Hargroves will want to meet you." "Then I'll meet them." "Margaret Hargrove is not—" He paused, seemed to choose his words with the care of someone who's had to learn to be careful. "She is a woman who has decided what she wants, and has had enough money and enough years to make most things go her way. She will come here looking for something to use against you, against me. She's good at finding things." "Let her look," Emma said. He studied her. "You're not afraid." "I didn't say that." She met his eyes directly. "I said let her look. Being afraid and standing your ground aren't mutually exclusive, Mr. Walker. I've been doing both for the last 3 weeks." Nick Walker looked at her for a long, quiet moment. Then he did something she hadn't seen him do yet. Something that rearranged his face entirely and made him look, just briefly, like the man he must have been before grief had set like concrete around him. He almost smiled. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then it was gone. "Week from Saturday," he said. He folded the paper and put it in his shirt pocket and turned back to his horse. "Mr. Walker." He stopped. "For what it's worth," Emma said, "your daughters are remarkable. Both of them. Whatever else has happened in this house, whatever she left behind when she went, those 2 girls are worth fighting for. And I think you already know that." He didn't turn around, but she saw his hands still on the saddle, saw his head drop just slightly, just for a moment, like something in him was leaning into the words before he could stop himself. Then he mounted his horse and rode out into the white heat of the afternoon. Emma stood in the yard and watched him go, and thought about lawyers and a woman in San Antonio who had walked away from her children and still had the audacity to want them back. She thought about what Rosa had said. Some things don't get fixed, they just get survived. She thought about Emily's fists and Sarah's ragdoll and the lamp on the floor. And she thought, not this time. Week from Saturday. She had 7 days. 7 days was not enough time to fix 11 years of accumulated grief. Emma knew that going in. But 7 days was what she had, and she used every hour of them. She started with the ledger. She worked on it each night after the girls were in bed, the lamp burning low on the desk, her pen moving in steady columns across fresh paper, reconstructing 18 months of neglected accounts, from receipts she found in the filing cabinet and invoices she tracked down in a box under the desk that someone had shoved there and forgotten. By the 4th night, the books were clean, balanced, every dollar accounted for. She started with the girls in the mornings. Not just lessons, real conversations, the kind that required sitting across from a child and looking at her like she mattered, which she did. Sarah bloomed fast and easy, the way younger children do when someone pays attention, chattering through her arithmetic and her letters, and pressing wildflowers she'd picked in the yard between the pages of Emma's notebook as gifts. Emily took longer. Emily always took longer. But by Thursday, she was staying after lessons voluntarily, asking questions about Robinson Crusoe that went well past the text itself. Questions about what it meant to be alone, what it meant to rebuild. Emma answered every one of them honestly. On Friday afternoon, Nick stopped in the doorway of the study where Emma was finishing the last column of the ledger and said, without preamble, "Margaret Hargrove is coming tomorrow morning. She's bringing her husband and their lawyer." "I know." Emma set down her pen. "I've been expecting it." Their lawyer is a man named Pruitt. He's been doing the Hargroves' legal work for 20 years. He's sharp." Nick paused. "He'll ask you questions." "Let him." Emma. He rarely used her first name. When he did, it had a different weight to it, less formal, more direct, like he was reaching across the distance he normally kept. "These are not reasonable people. They don't come here to negotiate. They come here to collect." She looked at him steadily. "Then we make sure there's nothing here for them to collect." He was quiet for a moment. His hands were on the doorframe, and she could see the tension in them. The knuckles, the set of his wrists. The body of a man holding himself together by will alone. "She's their daughter," he said. "Helen, whatever she did, whatever she chose, in their minds, she's still their daughter, and those girls are hers. And I took them. That's the story they've built." "You didn't take anyone," Emma said. "Helen left. There's a difference." "Not to them." "Then we correct their understanding." She closed the ledger and stood. "Nick, you have a clean household, 2 healthy daughters in active schooling with a qualified governess, and the counts that are now fully in order. You have Rosa, who has been with this family for 11 years and will say so plainly to anyone who asks. And you have me." She paused. "Let them come." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes that she couldn't quite name. Not gratitude exactly. Something rawer than that. "You've been here a week," he said. "A week is long enough to know what's worth fighting for." He didn't answer that. But he didn't leave either. He stood in the doorway another moment, like the room was the only place that felt steady. And then he said, very quietly, "Thank you, Emma," and walked away. She sat back down and looked at the closed ledger. Tomorrow. Margaret Hargrove arrived at 9:30. She arrived the way women of her type always arrived, ahead of schedule, with purpose, in a black carriage that was expensive without being ostentatious, which was its own kind of statement. She was 62 years old and looked 50, in the way that money and iron will can preserve a person like a specimen in glass. Her dress was gray silk. Her hair was white and pinned with the precision of someone who had decided decades ago that the world would see her exactly as she intended. Her husband, Gerald Hargrove, was a tall man going soft, with the look of someone who had spent 40 years agreeing with his wife and had made his peace with it. He shook Nick's hand. He avoided Emma's eyes. The lawyer, Pruitt, was smaller than she'd expected. Compact, wire-thin, with eyeglasses and a leather satchel, and the patient, pleasant expression of a man who'd learned that seeming harmless was an asset. Emma was standing in the front room when they came in. She'd chosen her dress with care, the best of the 2 that Rosa had found in the storage trunk, a dark blue wool that fit well enough and said working woman rather than charity case. Her hair was neat. Her feet had healed enough that she walked without favoring them. She watched Margaret Hargrove's eyes take her in. The assessment was rapid and total, the kind only women of a certain class can perform. A full inventory in under 3 seconds. Every detail catalogued and weighed. Then Margaret looked at Nick. "You've hired someone new." "My daughters needed a governess," Nick said. "Miss Emma Williams, from Missouri." Margaret's gaze returned to Emma. "Miss Williams." "Mrs. Hargrove." Emma kept her voice even and her posture straight. She didn't extend her hand. She let the woman come to her, or not, on her own terms. Margaret did not extend her hand. "How long have you been here?" she asked. 1 week, Emma said. Something flickered in Margaret's expression, too quick to catch fully, but Emma caught the edge of it. Satisfaction, like Emma had confirmed something. 1 week, Margaret repeated. She looked at Nick. You've known this woman 1 week. I've known her work for a week, Nick said, which is what matters. In a house with 2 young girls, I would think rather more than work matters. Margaret moved into the room without being invited to, the gesture of someone accustomed to rooms opening for them. I'd like to see the girls. They're in their lesson, Nick said. I'd like to see them. She said it the second time, with the exact same tone as the first, which was somehow more forceful than if she'd raised her voice. After we've talked, Nick said. Margaret looked at him. Then she sat down, folded her hands in her lap, and nodded to Pruitt. Pruitt opened his satchel. The conversation lasted 40 minutes, and it was the most controlled demolition Emma had ever witnessed. Pruitt asked the questions, methodical, reasonable-sounding questions about the household's finances, the girls' schooling arrangements, their health, their daily routine. Nick answered most of them. When Pruitt turned to Emma, he asked about her qualifications, her prior employment, her references. She answered everything, directly, without embellishment, without apology. And before your current employment here, Pruitt said pleasantly, you were in Abilene? Passing through, Emma said. And before Abilene? Jefferson City. You mentioned bookkeeping work. Can you provide a reference from your employer there? His name was George Alderman. He had a dry goods store on Market Street. She paused. He died in February. His widow sold the business. Pruitt wrote something down. Any other references from the period prior to your arrival here? Emma looked at him calmly. I've had a difficult 2 years, Mr. Pruitt. I lost my husband. I lost my child. I moved around trying to find stable ground. I don't have a stack of letters of recommendation from that period because people who are surviving aren't generally thinking about documentation. She paused. But I'm here now, and the girls are doing well, and the accounts are in order, and Mr. Walker is satisfied with my work. Mr. Walker has known you 1 week, Pruitt said pleasantly. And in that week, Emma said, just as pleasantly, I've done more for this household than it would appear has been done in the preceding 18 months. But you're welcome to verify that independently. The room went quiet. Margaret Hargrove was looking at her with an expression that had shifted. No longer the inventory-taking assessment of a woman dismissing a threat. Something sharper. The expression of a woman recalculating. You're very composed, Margaret said, for someone in your position. What position is that? Emma asked. A woman with no family, no references, no history that can be verified, employed for 1 week in a household you have no prior connection to. She let the words settle. It's an unusual situation. Many situations are unusual, Emma said. That doesn't make them wrong. Margaret looked at her steadily. My granddaughters need stability, continuity, the kind of female presence that comes from someone with roots, with a home, a community, a past that people can speak to. She paused. I mean no offense, Miss Williams, but what you're describing, a woman walking alone through Texas in July, is not stability. It's desperation. The word landed like a stone. Emma didn't flinch. You're right, she said. I was desperate. I'd lost everything, and I was trying to rebuild. That's not a shameful thing, Mrs. Hargrove. That's the thing that every person in this room would do in the same circumstances. The question isn't what brought me here. The question is what I've done since I arrived. She looked at Margaret directly. And what I've done is show up every single day for those girls and give them everything I have. For 1 week. Yes, for 1 week. And I intend to do it for the next week, and the one after that, and the one after that. Margaret held her gaze for a long moment. Then she turned to her husband and said something quietly, and he nodded, and she turned back to Nick. "I'd like to see the girls now." It was Sarah who walked into the room first, because Sarah had no fear of new people. She came in the way she always did, rag doll in hand, with that open, wondering look on her face. And she stopped when she saw Margaret and said, with perfect 5-year-old honesty, "You look like grandmother." Margaret's face changed completely. The controlled elegance cracked, just for a moment, and underneath it was something that Emma hadn't expected to see. Something that was unmistakably love. Complicated, possessive, grief-tangled love, but love nonetheless. Margaret Hargrove crossed the room and crouched in front of her granddaughter and said, "That's because I am your grandmother, sweetheart." And her voice was different, softer, human. Sarah looked at her. "Why don't you come visit?" "We do visit," Margaret said carefully. "Not for a long time," Sarah said. She patted Margaret's hand with the generous forgiveness of very small children. "But you're here now." Margaret looked up, over Sarah's head, across the room, and her eyes found Nick. Something passed between them that Emma couldn't fully read, but she could read enough of it. The anger was still there, the accusation. But under it was the mirror image of what Sarah had just done. A woman who had lost her daughter and was trying to hold on to the pieces. Emily came in from the hallway and stopped in the doorway. She looked at her grandparents. She looked at Pruitt. She looked at her father. And then she looked at Emma. Emma gave her the smallest nod, almost nothing, just enough. Emily straightened, walked into the room, stood beside her father. "Hello, grandmother," she said. Her voice was steady, controlled. Her father's voice in miniature. "Emily." Margaret stood up from her crouch and looked at her older granddaughter with something that was almost, not quite, uncertainty. "You've grown." "It's been 8 months," Emily said. "Yes." Margaret's mouth tightened. "It has." "Papa takes good care of us," Emily said. She said it plainly. No drama in it. Just a statement of fact from a child who had decided what was true and wasn't going to be talked out of it. "And Miss Emma does too. We do lessons every day, and she knows lots of stories, and Sarah likes her." She paused. "I like her too." The words hit the room like something solid. Emma had to look at the floor for a moment. Margaret Hargrove studied her granddaughter for a long moment. Then she looked at Emma again, and this time the look was different from all the previous ones. Not an inventory, not a calculation, not a dismissal. This time it was the look of a woman encountering something she hadn't planned for. Pruitt cleared his throat. "Mr. Walker," he said, "I think it might be useful if we—" "I think," Nick said, "we've talked enough." He said it very quietly. The quieter he got, Emma had learned in a week, the more immovable he was. Pruitt looked at Margaret. Margaret looked at Nick. "This isn't finished," she said. "No," Nick said, "but today is." He moved to the door and held it open. The gesture was courteous and entirely without flexibility. Gerald Hargrove stood and picked up his hat. Pruitt closed his satchel with a soft snap. Margaret didn't move immediately. She looked at her granddaughters one more time. At Sarah, who waved with her free hand, rag doll dangling, and at Emily, who stood straight and still, and something in her face shifted into something that looked unexpectedly like defeat. "I'll be in contact with your lawyer," she said to Nick. "That's between lawyers, then," Nick said. She walked out. Gerald followed. Pruitt followed Gerald. The door closed. The room was very quiet. Sarah looked at Nick. "Was that bad?" she asked. "No," Nick said. He crouched down to her level and touched her face gently with one rough hand. That was just people talking. Nothing bad happened. Good. Sarah held up her rag doll. Clara was worried. Clara's all right, Nick said. He stood up and looked at Emily, who was watching him with those dark, careful eyes. You did good, he said to her, very simply. Emily nodded, once, like she'd made a decision and executed it, and that was that. Then she left the room without fanfare, her footsteps light and deliberate down the hallway. Nick looked at Emma. Emma looked back at him. There was a long moment where neither of them said anything. Because what was there to say? The Hargroves were gone, and the petition was still real, and Pruitt's satchel was still full of papers, and this wasn't over. Thank you, Nick said. His voice was low, direct. The same 2 words he'd said the night before, but different now, weighted with something the night before hadn't had in it. Emily did the hard part, Emma said. Emily had someone to look at for a nod, Nick said. That was your part. Emma said nothing. She was thinking about Margaret Hargrove's face when Sarah said, "You look like grandmother." The crack and the elegance, the grief underneath, the love that was twisted up in all the wrong ways, but was love regardless. Nick, she said, Margaret Hargrove is not a villain. He looked at her. Excuse me? She's a woman who lost her daughter, not to death, which would be clean, but to a choice Helen made that Margaret probably doesn't fully understand and can't forgive herself for not preventing. Emma looked at him steadily. She's taking it out on you because you're here and Helen isn't. But what she actually wants is her granddaughters, and on that point, she's not entirely wrong. Nick's jaw tightened. She wants to take them from this ranch. She wants to make sure they're all right. Emma paused. Those aren't the same thing, even if she's going about it the wrong way. You're defending her. I'm describing her. There's a difference. She held his gaze. If you go into the next round of this, the lawyers, the petition, treating her like an enemy to destroy, you'll win maybe, and you'll lose anyway, because those girls will grow up knowing their grandmother fought for them, and their father fought her. And one day, they'll want to know why. Nick was very still. What are you suggesting? He said carefully. I'm suggesting that the thing that defeats the petition is not winning against Margaret Hargrove. It's making Margaret Hargrove understand that those girls are safe and loved and thriving where they are. Emma paused. Let her visit, supervised if you need to. Let her see Sarah's letters and Emily's arithmetic. Let her see that this is a home. The silence stretched. She hates me, Nick said. Yes, Emma said. She does. At the moment. She let that sit. People change when the thing they're afraid of stops being true. Nick looked at her for a long time, long enough that Emma started to wonder if she'd overstepped, if the week of built trust was thinner than it felt, if she'd misjudged how much room he'd given her. Then he said, very quietly, How are you this... He stopped. What? He shook his head. Nothing. Say it. He looked at her. His expression had something in it she'd only seen once before. That 2-second almost smile, but closer to the surface now, less defended. How are you this sure of things? You've been here a week. You've had your own losses. You've been walking across Texas in the dead of summer. He paused. Where does that come from? Emma thought about that honestly. When you lose everything, she said finally, you find out what's actually left. What's in you that doesn't need anything external to keep standing. She paused. What's left in me is this. Seeing clearly. Saying what I see. She looked at him. It's all I've got, Nick, but it's solid. He held her gaze. Something in him was very still. Not the closed, cemented stillness she'd seen in the beginning. Something different. Something that was being still, the way water is still, right before it starts to move. Rose is making supper, he said finally. I know. You should eat something. I intend to. He moved toward the door, stopped, turned back, just halfway. The Hargroves will come back, he said. Pruitt will file the next set of papers within the week. My lawyer says the hearing could be as early as the end of the month. I know, Emma said. Are you prepared for that to be harder than today? She met his eyes without blinking. Are you? He held her gaze for one long moment. Then he walked out. Emma stood alone in the front room and let out a breath she'd been holding since 9:30 that morning. Her hands were steady. Her feet hurt from standing so long in one place. The summer heat pressed against the windows like something patient and relentless. End of the month. She thought about Pruitt's satchel and Margaret Hargrove's face, and Emily standing straight beside her father, and Sarah's rag doll raised in a wave. She thought about what it was going to take to walk into a courtroom, or whatever room they used for these things in this county, and make the case that two little girls belonged right where they were. She thought about the lawyer. She thought about what she knew and what she didn't know, and what she needed to find out. And then she thought about something else. Something that had been sitting at the edge of her mind since Margaret Hargrove walked through the door and looked at her with that first total assessment. Something in the way the woman had asked about references. Not surprised that Emma lacked them, but specific. Too specific. Like she'd already known what she'd find. Emma went very still. Someone from town, Nick had said. Someone's been watching the property. She thought about Pruitt's pleasant expression and his careful questions. She thought about a leather satchel that had opened very quickly, like it had been packed and ready long before this morning. She thought about how the Hargroves had arrived ahead of schedule. And she thought, they didn't come here to see if I was qualified. They already knew I wasn't. Someone had told them exactly what to look for. Exactly what questions to ask. Exactly which angle to press. Someone on this ranch had been talking to the Hargroves. Her chest went cold. She turned and walked, very calmly, toward Rosa's kitchen. She had some questions of her own to ask. Rosa was at the stove when Emma walked in, and she didn't turn around right away. She kept stirring whatever was in the pot with a steady, unhurried rhythm of a woman who had learned to make herself useful and invisible at the same time. Emma had noticed that about her in the first 2 days, the way Rosa occupied a room without demanding anything from it. Rosa, Emma said. She kept her voice level, friendly even. Can I ask you something? You can ask, Rosa said. She still didn't turn around. Before the Hargroves arrived this morning, before this visit, did anyone contact them? From the ranch? The spoon slowed, just slightly, just enough. What makes you ask that? Rosa said. The way Pruitt asked his questions, Emma said. He wasn't fishing. He already knew what he was looking for. He knew I had no verifiable references before I arrived here. He knew I'd been walking, not traveling by stage or by rail, walking. He knew things that you'd only know if someone told you. She paused. Someone told the Hargroves exactly what they'd find when they came here. Rosa turned around. Her face was composed in the way that faces are composed when they are working hard at it. Her hands were still on the spoon, and the spoon was still over the pot, and she looked at Emma with eyes that were not guilty, but not clean either. I did not contact the Hargroves, Rosa said. I believe you, Emma said.
But you know who did.
A long silence. The pot bubbled softly.
Tom Greer, Rosa said finally. She said it the way you say a name you've been holding in your mouth like something sour. He's been with the ranch 6 years. He drives the supply wagon into town every week. She paused. He was very fond of Mrs. Walker before she left.
Fond of her. Rosa's expression said everything her words didn't.
He blamed Mr. Walker, Rosa said. He never said it plain, but after she left, he changed. Quieter. Angrier in a way that had no place to go. She set the spoon down on the counter. I have suspected him for months, but suspecting is not knowing. It is now, Emma said.
Rosa looked at her steadily.
What are you going to do?
Emma thought about that for exactly 3 seconds.
Tell Nick, she said, and then figure out what Greer told them and how much of it Pruitt has already put into his papers.
Rosa nodded, slowly, like a woman who has been waiting for someone else to make a decision that she couldn't make alone.
He drives the wagon into Calverton on Wednesdays, Rosa said. Today is Saturday. He'll be on the property until then.
Good, Emma said. That gives us time. She left the kitchen and went to find Nick. She found him in the barn. He was working on a harness that had come apart at the buckle, his hands moving with the automatic competence of a man who fixes things because he needs them fixed, not because he's thought about it. He looked up when she came in. She told him about Tom Greer in 2 minutes flat. No preamble, no softening. Just the facts in the order she'd assembled them. Nick didn't move while she talked. He held the harness in his hands and listened, and his face went through several things in rapid succession. Surprise, which he controlled quickly. Then something that was not surprise at all, but the recognition of something he should have seen sooner, and was angry at himself for missing. And then a cold, settled fury that he locked down behind his jaw, the way he locked everything else. When she finished, he set the harness down on the workbench. 6 years, he said. Rosa says he was close with Helen. He drove her to the stage when she left. Nick's voice was flat. He was the one who... She didn't tell me she was going. She left while I was out with the cattle. She told Tom. He drove her. He stopped, his hands pressed flat on the workbench. I knew he took it hard. I thought it was loyalty to the family. I didn't think... He stopped again. You trusted him, Emma said. That's not a character flaw. It's a mistake. Yes, Emma said, it is, and now we deal with it. He looked at her. You want to confront him? I want to know exactly what he told them, every detail, because Pruitt is going to use it in the hearing, and if we don't know what's in those papers, we can't counter it. She held Nick's gaze. And I want him off this property, but that comes second. Nick straightened. I'll talk to him. I'd like to be there, Emma said. Emma, some of what he told them was about me, she said. My arrival, my appearance, what I look like, and what I was wearing, and what condition I was in when I walked through that gate. She paused. He was watching me from the first day. In what he reported to the Hargroves, I want to hear it from him, because I know what the truth is, and if it doesn't match, I want to know how far he went. Nick studied her for a moment. All right, he said. He walked past her out of the barn, and she followed, and the summer heat hit them both like a wall. Tom Greer was not what Emma had expected either. She'd built a picture in her mind from Rosa's description. Angry, bitter, nursing a 6-year-old grievance. And the man she saw when Nick found him near the water trough was not precisely that. He was somewhere around 50, lean and weathered, with a face that had lived outdoors its whole life. He looked at Nick when Nick called his name, with the expression of a man who already knew this moment was coming and had decided to meet it standing up. "Boss," he said. "Tom." Nick stopped a few feet away. Emma stood slightly behind and to his right. "You want to tell me about your arrangement with the Hargroves?" Greer didn't flinch. "Don't know what you mean." "I think you do." A pause. Greer's eyes moved to Emma. Something shifted in them. Not shame exactly. Closer to defiance. "I mean her," Greer said. "That what you're asking about?" "I wrote to Mrs. Hargrove when this one showed up. Told her what I saw. Woman coming in off the road, looking like she'd been dragged through the territory. No shoes, no bag, nothing. I've got a responsibility to these children." "To these children," Nick said. His voice was very quiet. "Mrs. Walker cared about those girls," Greer said. "Whatever you think of her, whatever you told people." "I never told anyone anything about Helen," Nick said. "Not once." Greer's jaw tightened. "She didn't want to go. You pushed her out." The silence that followed was the kind that has a shape to it. Emma watched Nick very carefully. She watched him take that in, the accusation, the 6 years of blame behind it. And she watched him decide not to answer it the way he wanted to. "What did you tell Pruitt?" Nick said instead. "What I saw," Greer said. "The woman's got no references, no history anyone can find. She showed up with nothing, and you let her in with your daughters in the house." "You told him I arrived without shoes," Emma said. Greer looked at her. "It's the truth." "It is," Emma agreed. "And it's also the truth that I walked 23 days to get here, because I needed work, and I'd heard this was a good operation. That's not a crime, Mr. Greer." She kept her voice very steady. "What else did you tell him?" Greer said nothing. "You told him I had no references he could verify," Emma said. "You told him I arrived in poor physical condition. What else? Did you tell him what I said to you, that first day, at the gate?" Greer's expression shifted, just slightly. "You told him I was aggressive," Emma said. It wasn't a guess anymore. She could see it in his face. "That I pushed through the gate without permission. That I demanded entry rather than requesting it." "You did," Greer said. "I did," Emma agreed. "Because I needed work, and I had nothing left to lose. And a woman in that position who waits politely for permission gets turned away every time." She paused. "You framed it as a threat. In the letter you sent to Mrs. Hargrove." Greer looked at Nick. "I was protecting—" "Stop." Nick's voice cut through flat and final. "Stop talking about protection. You've been on this property for 6 years, and you spent 6 of them deciding I was the villain of a story you told yourself. And instead of bringing your grievance to me like a man, you went behind my back to people who are trying to take my daughters." He paused. His voice was, if anything, quieter. "Pack your things. You're off the ranch by sundown." Greer stared at him. "You're firing me?" "Yes." "Over her?" He jerked his chin toward Emma. "Over you," Nick said. "This isn't about her. This is about 6 years of loyalty I paid for, and you sold for the price of a letter to San Antonio." He held Greer's gaze without blinking. "Sundown." Greer held the eye contact for a long moment. Then he looked at Emma one more time, not with hatred exactly, with something more complicated, the expression of a man who knows he's wrong and can't forgive himself for being wrong, so he's going to be angry about it instead. Then he walked away. Nick watched him go. Emma watched Nick. "Are you all right?" she asked. "No," Nick said. He said it plainly, without drama. "But I will be." The hearing was set for the 28th of August. Nick's lawyer, a man named Caldwell, who worked out of Calverton, and had the precise, unhurried manner of someone who had practiced law in complicated counties long enough to have no illusions about it, came to the ranch on Monday. He sat at the dining table with Nick and Emma and a pot of Rosa's coffee, and laid the situation out with the directness of a man who respects people enough not to soften bad news. "Pruitt has filed on 3 grounds," Caldwell said. "Unstable household management, insufficient female oversight, and," he paused, "character concerns regarding the current employee."
"Me,"
Emma said. "You." Caldwell looked at her with the measured, evaluating gaze of a lawyer assessing a variable. "He's framed your arrival here as opportunistic. A woman with no verifiable history arriving at a vulnerable widower's home and being immediately placed in charge of his children." He paused. "It's not an entirely unreasonable case on paper." "What strengthens our position?" Nick asked. "Evidence of stability," Caldwell said. "The accounts being in order helps considerably. Emily and Sarah's documented progress in their studies helps. Rosa's tenure and testimony helps." He tapped the table. "Miss Williams's testimony helps, if she can give it without being dismantled on her lack of references." "I can give it," Emma said. Caldwell looked at her. "Pruitt will press on your history, your husband, your child, your period of displacement between Missouri and here." Emma kept her face even. "Let him press." "You lost a child," Caldwell said, not unkindly. "He may use that. The question of fitness—" "A woman who has lost a child is not unfit to care for children," Emma said. Her voice was steady. "She is someone who understands what it costs to love them." Caldwell held her gaze for a moment. Then he wrote something on his paper and said, "Say that, exactly like that, in front of the judge." Nick was looking at Emma across the table. She didn't look back. She was focused on Caldwell and the papers and the shape of what was coming. She couldn't afford to look at Nick right now, because when she looked at Nick, she saw the weight he was carrying, and she was afraid if she saw it too clearly, she'd stop thinking and start feeling. And feeling was not what this situation needed from her. "There's one more thing," Caldwell said. His voice had changed. Still measured, still professional, but something underneath it was careful in a new way. Nick looked at him. "What?" Caldwell set down his pen. "Pruitt has subpoenaed Helen." The room went completely still. Nick's face did something that Emma could not fully name. It was not one thing. It moved through several things in very rapid succession. Like a man watching a door blow open in a storm he thought he'd weather. "Helen is in San Antonio," he said. His voice was strange, flat in the wrong way, like it had been emptied out very quickly. "She was," Caldwell said. "As of 3 weeks ago, she's been staying with the Hargroves in Calverton." He paused. "She arrived the same week the petition was filed." Emma heard Nick's breath change. Just slightly. Just enough. "She's here," he said. "She's been here for 3 weeks," Caldwell said. "And she intends to testify at the hearing." Silence. Emma looked at Nick then. She couldn't help it. His face was the face of a man who has spent 18 months building a wall against a specific pain and has just discovered that the pain is going to walk into a courtroom and sit across from him. "What does she want?" Nick said. His voice had steadied. The wall was back up. But she could see what it was costing him. "Based on what Pruitt has filed, she's supporting the petition. She believes the girls would be better served in a more settled household." "She left them," Nick said. "She left 2 little girls and walked out and went to her parents and spent 18 months doing nothing." "I know," Caldwell said. He said it quietly, without argument. "And now she gets to stand in a courtroom and say, 'I'm unfit.'" She gets to try, Caldwell said. Our job is to make sure the judge sees the whole picture. Nick sat back. His hands were on the table, and they were very still. Emma could see the effort of that stillness, what it cost. I need some air, he said. He stood up and walked out. Emma looked at Caldwell across the table. How bad is this? She asked. Caldwell considered his answer with the care of a man who has learned that honesty and hope are not incompatible. A mother, even an absent one, carries considerable weight in a judge's perception, especially when the opposing position is a father and a woman who has been in the household for 10 days. He paused. But judges in this county are practical men. They look at what's in front of them. And what's in front of them will be 2 well-cared-for children, a stable household, and the man who has been there every single day. He looked at Emma directly. And you. Me specifically. You specifically, he confirmed. You are either the strongest argument for Nick's fitness as a guardian or the weakest, depending entirely on how you hold up. Emma said nothing for a moment. When is the hearing? She asked. The 28th. He gathered his papers. 11 days. She found Nick at the fence line at the far edge of the property, the place where the ranch gave way to open land and you could see for miles in 3 directions. He was standing with his arms on the top rail and his hat pushed back and his face turned toward the distance, with the expression of a man trying to find something in the landscape that would make sense of what he'd just heard. Emma stood beside him. For a while, neither of them spoke. That had become something between them over the past 10 days, the ability to be in the same silence without it being uncomfortable. She'd noticed it happening gradually, the way useful things happen between people who have to depend on each other quickly. You loved her, Emma said finally. Not a question. Nick didn't answer for a moment. Yes, he said. Once. What happened? He turned his head and looked at her. The look asked whether this was a question she needed answered, or one she was asking for him. She wasn't happy here, he said. She never was, really. I think I knew that, and I thought it would change. That she'd find something in this life to hold on to. He paused. She found the girls, for a while, and then even that wasn't enough. He looked back at the horizon. The last year before she left, we were 2 people living in the same house who'd stopped seeing each other. And one morning I went out with the cattle, and when I came back, she was gone. Emma was quiet. I didn't fight for her, he said, when she left. I didn't try to bring her back. I thought, if she's that unhappy, maybe it's better. He paused. I've spent 18 months wondering if that was the right decision. It was the honest one, Emma said. He looked at her. You couldn't have made her stay, Emma said. And a woman who stays without wanting to isn't a mother. She's a presence. Those girls needed a parent who chose to be there. She held his gaze. You chose. Every day for 18 months, you chose. Nick was very still. I'm afraid of seeing her, he said. He said it like a man pulling a splinter, fast, clean, because leaving it in hurts more. In the courtroom, I'm afraid I'll... He stopped. What? Feel something I can't afford to feel in front of a judge. Emma thought about that honestly, about what it meant, what it cost him to say it. You won't, she said, because when you're sitting in that room, you're not going to be looking at Helen. You're going to be looking at those 2 girls. She paused. And that's all you'll need. Nick looked at her for a long, quiet moment, long enough that Emma felt the air between them change, become something slightly different from what it had been, the way air changes before a shift in weather. Emma, he said.
"Don't," she said, gently but clearly. He stopped. She looked at him steadily. "Not now. The timing's wrong, and we both know it." She paused. "After the 28th.
He held her gaze. Then something in his face, not the wall, not the grief, but the thing underneath both of them that had been there since the very first night she'd sat at his supper table, settled. Like a decision being made quietly in a room nobody else was in. "After the 28th, he said. Emma looked back at the horizon. 11 days. Emily appeared at the fence line 20 yards away, walking toward them with her particular deliberate stride, and Emma saw her assess the situation in one quick glance. Her father at the fence, Emma beside him, and something in the girl's face did a complicated thing. The kind of thing that 9-year-olds do when they are processing something they don't have words for yet. She came and stood on Emma's other side and put her arms on the fence rail the exact way her father had. "Rosa says supper's ready," she said. "We're coming," Nick said. Emily didn't move immediately. She stood there with her arms on the rail and her eyes on the same horizon her father was looking at. And she said, without looking at either of them, "Are we going to be okay?" Nick looked at her. Emma looked at her. "Yes," they said. They said it at the same time, and neither of them had planned to. Emily looked from one to the other, and then she did something Emma had never seen her do. She reached out and took Emma's hand. Just for a moment. Just long enough to squeeze it once, quickly, like something she needed to do before she thought about it too much. Then she let go and pushed off the fence. "Don't be late," she said, and walked back toward the house. Emma looked at her hand. Nick was watching his daughter walk away with that expression he got, the one that was so full of love it barely fit in the human face. 11 days, Emma said quietly. He nodded. "We're going to need to talk to Caldwell again," she said. "About Helen. About what she's likely to say and what we can counter." She paused. "And I need to write some letters." "To who?" "George Alderman's widow," Emma said. "My former employer's wife in Jefferson City. She knew me. She can speak to my character." She paused. "And I need to write to my sister in Kansas City." Nick looked at her. "You have a sister?" "I haven't spoken to her in 2 years," Emma said. "That was my fault, not hers. We fell out after the baby." She paused. "But she knew me before any of this, before I lost everything. She can tell a judge who I was, and I think who I was is worth something." "Emma," his voice was quiet, "writing to her after 2 years, that costs you something." She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "It does." "Are you sure?" She thought about Emily's hand in hers. She thought about Sarah's rag doll at the supper table, and the lamp broken on the floor, and the night she'd sat alone after they'd all gone to bed and let herself feel, just briefly, that this might be worth something. "I'm sure," she said. She walked back toward the house. Behind her she heard Nick follow, his footsteps steady and deliberate on the dry summer ground, the same as they were every day, every step. A man who had decided to keep going, and kept making that decision every single morning. She understood that completely. She'd been doing it herself for 2 years. Inside, the lamp was lit. Rosa was at the stove. Sarah was already in her chair, with Clara the ragdoll propped against the salt cellar. And when Emma came through the door, Sarah looked up and said, "You were gone a long time." "I know," Emma said. "I'm sorry." "That's okay," Sarah said. "Clara kept me company." Emma sat down across from her and looked at that small, bright face, open and trusting in the way it still was, in spite of everything. And she felt something settle in her chest. Not peace exactly, something more active than peace, something that was going to have to be enough to get through the next 11 days. Whatever Helen Walker said in that courtroom, Emma intended to be ready for it. Whatever Pruitt put in his papers, she intended to answer. And whatever it cost her, the letters, the 2-year silence broken, the standing up in a room full of strangers and making the case for who she was and what she was worth, she intended to pay it. Because those girls deserved someone who would. The letters went out on Monday morning. Emma wrote them the night before, at Nick's desk, with the same lamp and the same ink she'd used on the ledger. The letter to George Alderman's widow took 3 drafts. The letter to her sister Catherine took 7. She threw the first 6 into the wastebasket, because they were either too apologetic or not apologetic enough. And finally, on the 7th, she wrote the truth plainly. I need you, and I know I don't have the right to ask, and I'm asking anyway, and sealed it before she could change her mind. She slept 3 hours. She was at the breakfast table before Rosa had finished with the stove. The 11 days that followed were the most focused of her life. She and Caldwell met 3 more times. She told him everything. Jefferson City, the baby, the months of drifting, the walk from Abilene. She told him the parts she hadn't told anyone, because he needed to know before Pruitt did, and because a lawyer who is surprised in the courtroom is a lawyer who loses. Caldwell listened to all of it without expression and then said, "All right, here's how we use it." She kept the girls in lessons. She kept the accounts current. She fixed a broken latch on the schoolroom door that had been broken since before she arrived, because it needed doing, and because physical work kept her hands busy when her mind was running too fast. Nick watched her. She knew he was watching, and she let him, because they had made an implicit agreement on the fence line after the 28th, and the watching was its own kind of steadiness, the way 2 people can hold each other up without touching. On the 6th day, a letter came from Kansas City. Emma read it standing in the hallway, and her eyes went blurry on the 3rd line, and she pressed her hand flat against the wall and breathed through it. Catherine had written back by return post. 2 pages, both sides of each sheet, the handwriting slightly uneven in the places where Catherine had been crying while she wrote. She said yes. She said she'd be on the next stage to Calverton. Emma folded the letter very carefully and put it in her dress pocket, and didn't tell anyone about it until supper, when Nick looked at her face across the table and said, without asking what he was asking about, "Good news?" "Yes," Emma said. He nodded. He passed her the bread. Catherine Williams arrived on the morning of the 26th, 2 days before the hearing, and she was everything Emma had forgotten about having family. She was 34, 2 years younger than Emma, with her mother's red hair gone darker with age, and the same stubborn set to her jaw that Emma saw in the mirror every morning. She came off the stage with a carpet bag and 3 years of complicated feelings on her face. And when she saw Emma standing in front of Nick's carriage, she stopped for a moment and just looked at her. Then she crossed the distance between them and put her arms around her sister and held on. Emma held on back. Neither of them said anything for a moment. They didn't need to. "You look thin," Catherine said finally into Emma's shoulder. "I was," Emma said. "I'm better." Catherine pulled back and looked at her. Really looked, the way sisters look. The kind of inspection that doesn't miss anything and doesn't pretend to. "You look—" She stopped. Started again. "You look like yourself, more than you did the last time I saw you." "The last time you saw me, I was falling apart." "Yes," Catherine said plainly. "You were." She looked past Emma at Nick, who was standing by the carriage at a respectful distance with his hat in his hands. "Is this him?" "This is Mr. Walker," Emma said. "Nick." Catherine extended her hand. "Mr. Walker, I'm Catherine Williams, Emma's sister." She looked at him with the frank, assessing gaze of a woman who needs to know very quickly whether the man her sister has attached herself to is worth the trouble. "She tells me you have 2 daughters." "I do," Nick said. "She tells me they've taken to her." "They have." Catherine looked at him for one more second. Then she nodded, once, with the finality of a woman who has made a judgment and is satisfied with it. "Good," she said. "Then I'm glad I came." The night before the hearing, nobody slept much. Emma sat with Catherine in the narrow room until past midnight, talking in the low voices of people who've been separated and are trying to cover the distance. They talked about their mother, who'd died 3 years back. They talked about Emma's husband, James, and the baby. They'd never talked about the baby properly, not through the grief and the silence and the falling out. And they talked about it now, quietly and honestly, because there was nothing left to protect and nowhere left to hide it. Catherine cried. Emma didn't, because she'd learned to cry about it alone, at night, and it had become a private thing. But she held her sister's hand, which was the same. At some point past midnight, Catherine said, "Are you in love with him?" Emma was quiet for a moment. "That's not what this is about right now," she said. "That's not a no," Catherine said. Emma looked at her hands. "The timing is, I know the timing," Catherine said. "I'm asking about the feeling." Emma was quiet for a long time. "Yes," she said, very quietly. "The way you say something that you haven't said out loud before, carefully, like it's made of something that could break if you're not careful with it." "I think I am." Catherine squeezed her hand. "Good," she said. "You've been alone too long. So is he. All the better." Emma looked at the ceiling. "Tomorrow first." "Tomorrow first," Catherine agreed. The courtroom in Calverton was a plain room in a plain building, with wooden benches and a judge's bench, and the smell of pine resin and paper that Emma associated from that day forward with the particular terror of having the most important things in your life evaluated by a stranger. Judge Harlan was 60, compact, with a white beard and the watchful, patient eyes of a man who has heard every kind of human story and has learned to sort truth from performance. He looked at everyone in the room when he came in, not lingering, just cataloging, and Emma filed that away as useful. She filed a lot of things away in the first 10 minutes. Pruitt was at his table, composed and pleasant, his leather satchel open. Margaret and Gerald Hargrove were in the gallery, Margaret in gray again, her face controlled. Next to her was a woman Emma had never seen, Helen Walker. She was 34 years old, and she was beautiful in the way that certain women are beautiful, effortlessly, without trying, which was its own kind of power. She had dark hair and light eyes, and she sat with her hands folded in her lap and looked at the front of the room. She didn't look at Nick. Nick sat at Caldwell's table and looked at the judge's bench and kept his face clear by an act of will that Emma, watching from the second row behind him, could almost feel from where she sat. Emily and Sarah were not in the courtroom. They were at the ranch with Rosa. Emma had said goodbye to them that morning, and Sarah had pressed Clara the rag doll into her hands and said, "For luck." And Emma had held the rag doll all the way to Calverton, and then given it to Catherine to keep in her bag, because she needed her hands free. Catherine sat beside her now. She reached over and took Emma's hand and held it, which helped. Pruitt made his opening statement. It was smooth and reasonable and carefully built. The story of a household in disorder, an absent mother, a father overwhelmed, and a stranger of uncertain character introduced suddenly into 2 vulnerable children's lives. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He simply described, in the measured language of a man who has learned that a jury, or a judge, is moved more by architecture than by drama. Caldwell made his. It was shorter, and it was honest, and it contained one line that Emma had written herself in his notes the previous week. These children do not need to be removed from the only home they have ever known. They need to be seen where they are. Judge Harlan wrote something down and said, "We'll proceed." Pruitt called Helen first. Emma watched her walk to the witness chair with the same catalog she'd applied to everything in the room: posture, expression, the placement of her hands. Helen moved like a woman who had rehearsed this moment and was executing it with precision. She sat down, settled her skirt, and looked at Pruitt. She testified for 20 minutes. Her voice was low and clear, and she spoke about the girls with a tenderness that was real. Emma could hear that it was real, which was the most complicated thing about it. She spoke about her concerns for their well-being, about the isolation of the ranch, about the importance of female stability. She did not speak about leaving. Pruitt did not ask her to. When Caldwell stood for cross-examination, he was very quiet. "Mrs. Walker," he said, "when did you last see your daughters?" Helen's hands shifted in her lap. 8 months ago. "And before that?" A pause. 10 months. "So in the past 18 months, you have seen your daughters twice." "I have had circumstances." "Yes or no, Mrs. Walker?" "Yes," she said, quietly. "During those 18 months, who fed your daughters every morning?" Helen said nothing. "Who sat with them when they were sick? Who heard their prayers at night? Who was there when Emily broke her arm last spring? And who held Sarah when she was frightened of the storm in June?" Helen's jaw was very tight. "Their father." "Their father," Caldwell said. "And the woman he hired to help him care for them. Who has been present in that house every single day for the past 3 weeks?" He paused. No further questions. Helen walked back to her seat. She sat down next to her mother. She did not look at Nick. But at the very last second, just before she settled in her seat, her eyes moved to Emma and stayed for one moment, just one. And the expression in them was not hatred. It was something more complicated. The expression of a woman looking at the person who is doing the thing she chose not to do, and being unable to decide how she feels about it. Then she looked away. Emma looked at the front of the room and kept her face still. Pruitt called Emma next. She walked to the witness chair with her back straight and her feet steady. Fully healed now, no pain in them at all. And she sat down and folded her hands in her lap and looked at Pruitt the way she'd looked at him in Nick's front room. Directly, without performance. He went through her history methodically. Missouri, Jefferson City, the months of travel, the walk to Walker Ranch. He asked about her husband, her child. He asked every question Caldwell had told her to expect, and she answered each one plainly and without flinching. Then he said, "Miss Williams, would you say that a woman who has lost a child is fully equipped to care for other people's children?" The room went very quiet. Emma looked at him. She let the silence sit for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to be deliberate, not long enough to seem like hesitation. "A woman who has lost a child," she said, "knows the exact weight of what it means to have one. She knows it in a way that cannot be learned any other way. She knows what those girls are worth, because she knows what loss costs." She paused. "That is not a disqualification, Mr. Pruitt. That is the most significant qualification I have." Pruitt held her gaze for a moment. Then he said, very carefully, And yet you arrived at Walker Ranch with nothing. No home, no family, no references. I arrived with everything that mattered, Emma said. My education, my judgment, my willingness to work. And I was willing to walk 23 days across a Texas summer to find a place where those things could be of use. She paused. I don't apologize for the walk, Mr. Pruitt. I think it says more for my character than against it. Pruitt wrote something down. And your sister, Miss Catherine Williams, has come here today to speak on your behalf. She has. When did you last speak to your sister before this month? 2 years ago, Emma said. You were estranged.
We were grieving separately, Emma said, and doing it badly. That happens in families. We have repaired it. She looked at him steadily. People repair things. That's the thing you seem to keep leaving out of your argument. Pruitt's pleasant expression flickered, just barely. No further questions, he said. Catherine was brief and devastating. She spoke for 8 minutes, in the direct, unfussy manner of a woman who has nothing to sell and is simply reporting what she knows. She described Emma's teaching, her intelligence, her stubbornness, the way she had kept a household together when her husband was dying, and kept herself together when the baby died, and kept walking when the walking was the hardest thing in the world. My sister, Catherine said, is the kind of woman who shows up. Whatever the situation asks for, she figures out what it needs, and she shows up for it. I have never known her to do otherwise. She paused. She is exactly where she is supposed to be. Those children are lucky she walked through that gate. The courtroom was very quiet. Judge Harlan looked at Catherine over his glasses for a moment. Then he wrote something down. Nick testified last. He sat in the witness chair and he looked at Judge Harlan, and he spoke in the careful, even voice of a man who has decided to tell the truth the whole way through, regardless of what it costs. He talked about Helen, not as Caldwell had, in the clinical language of timelines and dates, but honestly. He said that their marriage had not been happy for several years, and that he bore responsibility for some of that. He said he had not fought her choice to leave, because fighting her would not have made her want to stay. And a woman who stays without wanting to is not the same as a mother. He said he had grieved and made mistakes and let the accounts go and the house go quieter than it should have been, and that all of that was true. Then he said, "But I did not let my daughters go, not for 1 day, not for 1 hour." He talked about Emily and Sarah with the plain precision of a man describing the most important facts he knows. Emily's questions about Robinson Crusoe. Sarah's rag doll at the supper table. The way Emily had stood beside him in the front room when the Hargroves came, and held herself straight. My older daughter, he said, is 9 years old. She has watched 2 governesses leave, and she threw a lamp against a wall the morning she found out the Hargroves were coming, because she didn't know any other way to say she was scared. He paused. The woman who walked in and cleaned up that lamp, and told Emily to help her, and kept teaching, and kept showing up every single morning, that woman has given my daughters something I couldn't give them alone. He looked at the judge directly. I'm asking you to let us keep that. All of us. Together. The room was very still. Judge Harlan set down his pen and looked at both tables and then at the gallery, where Margaret Hargrove was sitting with her hands in her lap, and her face very controlled, and her eyes, if Emma was reading them correctly, very wet. I'm going to take a 30-minute recess, Judge Harlan said. Then I'll have my ruling. The 30 minutes were the longest Emma had ever sat through. She and Nick stood in the hallway outside the courtroom.
Catherine stood a few feet away, giving them privacy, which Emma noted with gratitude. They didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say that hadn't already been said, in the room and before it, and in 11 days of working side by side toward this single hour. Nick looked at the wall across from him. His jaw was tight, but his hands were loose at his sides, which she'd learned was the better sign. The hands always told the truth about him before the face did. "Whatever happens," he said. "Don't," Emma said. He looked at her. "Don't finish that sentence," she said. "Because whatever happens, we deal with it and we keep going. There is no version of this where we stop." She held his gaze. "So don't make a speech about it. Just stand here." He looked at her for a long moment. Then the corner of his mouth moved. Not the ghost of a smile, an actual one, small and real and more valuable for being so. "All right," he said. They stood there. The door opened. Caldwell leaned out. "Judge is ready." Judge Harlan spoke for 4 minutes. He spoke about the welfare of children as the only consideration that mattered to him. He spoke about stability and continuity and the demonstrable evidence before him. The accounts, the schooling records, Caldwell's documentation of Emily and Sarah's daily life over the past 3 weeks, Catherine's testimony, and Nick's. He spoke about the petition, and then he denied it. He denied it fully, without conditions, in clear and final language. The Walker children would remain in the custody of their father. The Hargrove petition was dismissed. Any future petitions would require substantially changed circumstances to be considered. He set down his papers. He looked at the room over his glasses. "We're adjourned," he said. The sound that came out of Nick was something Emma would remember for the rest of her life. Not loud, barely audible. Just a single breath released as though he'd been holding it for 18 months and had finally been told he was allowed to breathe. She put her hand on his arm. He covered it with his. They stayed like that for a moment. Just that. Just hands, in a courtroom in a Texas summer. And it was the most honest thing Emma had felt since she'd left Missouri. Then Catherine said, from behind them, "Can we go home now?" And Nick laughed, a real one, rusty with disuse, but real. And Emma turned, and her sister was standing there with Clara, the rag doll, extended in both hands like an offering. "Sarah's going to want this back," Catherine said. Margaret Hargrove stopped them in the doorway. Emma saw her coming and felt Nick tense beside her, and she pressed her hand slightly on his arm. Just slightly, just enough, and he stilled. Margaret looked at Nick. Her face was stripped of the controlled elegance. She just looked tired, older, like a woman who has spent a long time being certain and has just discovered the cost of it. "I want to see them," she said. "Emily and Sarah. I want to be able to see them." Nick looked at her for a long moment. Emma watched him weigh it. The 18 months, the petition, the lawyers, Greer's letters, all of it. Everything this woman had put him through. 2 Sundays a month, Nick said. At the ranch. You're welcome at the ranch. Margaret looked at him. Something in her face broke open just slightly, and then closed again, but in a different configuration than before. Less armored, more honest. "Thank you," she said. She said it like she was not accustomed to saying it, and was doing so anyway, because it was true. She walked past them, out of the building. Gerald Hargrove paused beside Nick as he followed his wife. He looked at Nick with the expression of a man who has mostly been agreeing with someone else for 40 years, and occasionally wonders what he actually thinks. "She's not a bad woman," he said. "She just loved Helen too much to see clearly." "I know," Nick said. Gerald nodded. He walked out. Helen had already gone. Emma didn't see her leave, and she thought that was probably the right way for it to happen. A departure, quiet, without drama, the way the first one had been. But she thought about the look on Helen's face in the courtroom, the complicated thing. She thought that Helen was going to have to live with her choices in her own way, and that there was nothing more to be done about that except let her. They got back to the ranch at 4:30. Sarah heard the carriage before it stopped and came out of the house at a run, rag doll bouncing in her hand, and when Emma stepped down, she launched herself at Emma's legs with a force that nearly knocked her sideways. "You're back," Sarah said, into Emma's skirt. "Clara and I were worried." "I know," Emma said. "We're back." She reached down and picked her up, which she hadn't done before. Sarah was 5, not a baby, and there'd been no occasion for it. But she did it now without thinking, and Sarah wrapped her arms around Emma's neck and pressed her face against Emma's shoulder, and said, in the muffled voice of a small child who has been anxious all day and is now releasing it, "Are we staying?" "You're staying," Emma said. "All of you." Emily was standing in the doorway, not running, never running. But her whole body had the look of something that has been very tightly wound and is now, very carefully, letting go. Nick walked past Emma and went straight to Emily and crouched in front of her and said something Emma couldn't hear. Emily's jaw moved. She looked at her father's face and checked it, the way she always did, looking for the truth underneath the words. Whatever she found there, it satisfied her. She stepped forward and put her arms around her father's neck, quickly, fiercely, the way children hug when they've been holding it in and can finally stop. Nick held her the way a man holds something irreplaceable. Emma looked away to give them that. She looked at the ranch, at the fence line and the barn and the sky going amber over the flat Texas land. The summer heat beginning finally to ease towards something that might, in a few weeks, be something like fall. Catherine appeared at her elbow. "What now?" she said. "Now," Emma said, "Rosa makes supper." "And then?" Emma thought about the fence line, about after the 28th, about Nick's hands on the harness and his voice in the courtroom, and the single breath released when the judge said the words that changed everything. "And then we figure out what comes next," she said. Together. That evening, after the dishes were cleared and Sarah was in bed with Clara tucked beside her, and Emily had said goodnight, with the particular directness she'd been practicing all week. Not, "I like her," not, "She's staying," just, "Good night, Miss Emma," which meant everything. Nick found Emma on the porch. He stood beside her and looked at the sky the way he'd looked at the horizon from the fence line, but differently this time. The tightness was gone from his hands. The wall behind his eyes was still there, but it had doors in it now. She could see the doors. "It's over," he said. "This part of it," she said. He looked at her. "The rest of it," he said, carefully. "I'd like to figure that out with you, if you're willing." Emma looked at him. She thought about 23 days of walking. She thought about a gate that wasn't locked. She thought about a 9-year-old girl throwing a lamp and a 5-year-old pressing a rag doll into her hands for luck. She thought about a ledger full of blank spaces that she'd filled back in, one careful column at a time. "I'm willing," she said. He reached out and took her hand. She let him. The summer night settled around Walker Ranch, quiet and warm and full of the sounds of a place that was, for the first time in a long time, simply at peace with itself. No lawyers, no letters, no walls to hold up by force of will. Just a man and a woman standing on a porch in Texas, holding on. Emma Williams had walked 23 days to find solid ground. She had found it, and she was not walking anywhere else.